Security guards of Reddit. What is the most bizarre thing you've seen through a surveillance camera? A random acquaintance of the homeowner sneaked onto the property and had a long banging session in the pool. I had to watch the footage, back it up, and delete it from the security system. I worked as an AV technician, not security, but sometimes homeowners would want us to integrate their security systems into their control systems. I was working on a brand new $2 million home. Marble floors, hand-carved woodwork, a massive pool, just a stunning house. One day, the mom called me over to check on something. She discreetly pulled me aside and asked if there was any way to save and delete certain data from the security footage. I showed her how to do it on her tablet. The next day, she called me again, saying she couldn't manage to do it and needed help. Her husband was there too, and they were both really cool, down-to-earth people. She gave me a heads up. They'd been out of town when someone had come to visit. She didn't want to delete the footage entirely in case she needed it for court later, but she decided not to press trespassing charges. It was obvious she didn't want to explain much further, but she knew who the girl was, and the girl's dad had even come by to apologize. She asked me to find the specific time frames, save the footage, and delete it. So I was going through the footage with my co-worker and her husband, who left pretty quickly, and that's when we saw it. A girl and a guy walking up to the pool, starting to make out for about 30 minutes. Then they moved to the end of the pool and started doing it on the side of the pool, BJ69, then full-on pounding. After that, they crawled into the pool and continued for almost 2 hours. It was super awkward to watch, especially while I was trying to get the times and back up the footage. Hands down, one of the most awkward experiences ever. Having to watch all of that, then back it up and hand it over to strangers. Story 2. I am not a security guard, but when I moved into the building I live in, we have a channel on the TV that lets you see the security cameras in the building. There are 9 of them in little squares. One is in the laundry room. I was here about a week and decided to check out the security channel out of curiosity. In the laundry room, I could see what looked like a man standing behind a woman who was bent over the sink. He was really giving it to her. I could see him moving a lot and floppy hair in front of him. I was shocked. What kind of place did I just move into? Should I take off my pants? And so I did. Then something happened. The man moved out of the way. The long floppy hair was attached to a very thin neck. Then it hit me. This was not some man banging the crap out of a woman after all. It was someone trying to unclog the drain with the handle end of a mop. I still finished though. Story 3. About 12 years ago, I worked at a video rental store, a large chain with hundreds of locations. This incident took place in the district near mine. One day, the district manager came by one of the stores to handle some back office work and decided to check the security footage. He randomly selected a day from a few weeks earlier and pulled up a video of 2 employees getting it on at the back office desk, the very desk he was sitting at. Immediately, he calls headquarters and they send in a team to investigate. It turned out that a guy and a girl working at the store had decided to hook up in the office one day. After that, every time they worked the same shift, they'd sneak off to the office to shag. A week or so later, one of their co-workers randomly walked in on them. Instead of freaking out or reporting them, the third person just joined in. A couple of days after that, another employee got involved, and things spiraled from there. Soon, nearly the entire staff were going in and banging in the back office. The whole time, the office had a security camera, but not one person thought to cover it up or delete the footage. A couple of days later, the employees showed up to find a now hiring all positions sign on the door. As each of them walked in, they were handed their termination papers and final paychecks. No explanation given. Corporates had decided to just clean house and pretend like this whole mess never happened. Story 4. A bear patient under observation lubed up in the bathroom and slipped past security, sprinting through the ER to his car. Unfortunately, he didn't have his keys. I work weekends at a hospital for a security company, and the facility has hundreds of cameras covering almost every area. I'm often assigned to monitor the cameras in rooms where patients are under observation for threats to themselves or staff, and I also have access to the archived footage. The most bizarre thing I've ever seen in the archives was a patient under observation who managed to escape security and made it all the way to his car, completely bare. This guy was admitted for reasons I've only heard secondhand. He was in his mid-20s, looked fairly normal compared to the usual psychiatric patients that come through, and was likely delusional and a danger to himself. The key to his story was that he came to the hospital for help with his problems, but didn't realize that by admitting he was thinking about offing himself, a doctor would order him under observation, which meant he couldn't leave whenever he wished. Mental health care in the ER can take hours because specialized staff are off-site and only one is on campus at a time. He couldn't wait any longer and decided he made a mistake by coming to the ER, so he planned his escape. This guy was smarter than most, though. He took note of the cameras, studied their angles, and observed how other patients were escorted to a special bathroom by security. The guards were distracted with the other patients, and he noticed that the guards assigned to the hall were seated and unable to leave their posts unless replaced. If someone ran, they'd have a significant head start before another officer could get to them. All he had to do was get out of reach of the nearest officer, and they wouldn't be able to follow. There was one issue. The bathroom door opened toward the seated guard in the hallway. But he seemed to have a solution. He convinced the first guard to let him use the bathroom. Everything went according to his plan. Guard 1 opened the door, let him into the hall, then returned to watching the other patients. Guard 2 stayed seated, watching to make sure he entered the bathroom. The patient stayed in the bathroom for almost 10 minutes, and the guard in the hall didn't think anything was unusual. While in the bathroom, which wasn't covered by cameras, the patient stripped completely bare and coated his body in a thick layer of hand soap and water. Once he was fully lubed up, he flung the bathroom door open with all his strength. The seated guard almost fell out of his chair in surprise. Before the guard could react, the patient sprinted down the hall at full speed, turning the corner toward the waiting room. The patients in the waiting room just froze, while the guards near the entrance/exit started running toward him. A dozen nurses and security guards rushed to stop him, but no one could catch him. He was so slippery that every attempt to grab him failed. Some guards were stunned, muttering, "What the heck?" while others sprinted after him. In under 30 seconds, he was out of the hospital and on the sidewalk heading toward the parking garage. He made it all the way to his car, but when he reached for the keys, they weren't in his pocket. Story 5. I got to see some chick getting face banged in a jacuzzi. The kicker was that she was under the water, and the guy was using the handrail as leverage to ram his rod. He was straight up moving the frigging rail too. It wasn't passionate. He was straight up hate banging this chick. Story 6. I've been working in security for over 13 years, so I've seen my fair share of strange things on CCTV. Most of the time, the incidents are mild and pretty comical. But this one was by far the weirdest. A man was sitting in the driver's seat of a minivan, apparently waiting for someone. At first, it seemed normal, but then he started shifting around, lifting his backside to scratch. Well, it got weird when he stuck his arm down the back of his pants, like past his elbow, where he remained in that position, while fishing around for a solid 4 to 5 minutes. Just as he's doing this, he notices in the side mirror someone walking up, a woman with a toddler and a baby in a stroller. He immediately pulls his arm out, yanks up his pants, and fastens his belt. Without missing a beat, he jumps out of the van and helps them load the stroller and bags into the car. As his wife places the baby in the car seat, he casually looks at his nails and then smells his fingers. He finishes up, closes the hatch, and gets in the driver's seat, holding his wife's hand, with the same hand. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. Story 7. I wasn't working the cameras myself, but I was on break from patrol and sitting in the control room with the guys who did when one of them spotted a car pulling into an entrance driveway. It was around 2 a.m. at this point. So, control connects with patrol at that end and has one of them go check it out. Patrol gets to the gates and says he can't see much, so control swings another camera around from the other side of the main road, and we see a young couple, about 20 or so, getting down to business. Now, control is feeling generous and says, "Let's give the lad 10 to 15 minutes to finish up, then we'll chase them off." Fast forward 15 minutes, and the girl's head is still bouncing up and down, so enough's enough, the driveway needs to be cleared. Control gets patrol back on comms and sends the team out to handle it. The lead of patrol heads out quietly with the detail in tow, and the couple is completely oblivious. The lead walks down the driver's side, smacks the side of the car, and shines his torch straight inside. I swear, we could hear the guys scream in the office. It wasn't the girl, it was the guy screaming. Poor guy's girl had gotten so startled she, I don't know, clenched or something for a moment, and the poor bastard screamed bloody murder. The patrol lead was stunned, but we could hear on the radio that he was about to lose it, shouting, Call a frigging ambulance. I swear, every guy in the office cringed and winced in exactly the same way. Story 8. I work for a CCTV company, and let me tell you, I've seen some wild stuff. Here's the craziest. One morning at 6 a.m. in Myrtle Beach, 2 guys and a girl were having a pretty intense threescore in a hotel jacuzzi. After about 10 minutes, the guys switched places and kept going. We had just installed the camera system, and all the techs were gathered around watching the replay. Once they finished, they went upstairs, and I happened to pass them in the hallway without recognizing them. Then I saw the tape. The best part, they never bothered to clean the jacuzzi afterward. To this day, I can't bring myself to use the hotel jacuzzis. We also do work at a food factory, and one day the oven caught fire. A cook, being a complete idiot, shoved his face into the oven to see if the smell was really from a fire. Flames were pouring out of the top, and he just leans in. Somehow, he manages to walk away without getting hurt, but not even 5 seconds later, a fireball shot out exactly where his face had been. He was literally seconds away from accident and had no clue. The fire was so intense it destroyed a 100 by 100 foot room. It took 28 fire trucks from 3 different counties to put out the blaze. The whole thing was caught on tape until the cameras literally melted. The cost to rebuild that room? Around $3.2 million. Story 9. Probably the worst thing I saw was a female employee full out, scratching her kitty. Then she reversed to her behind and did the same. Guess both sides were itchy. But wait, there's more. She then sniffed her hand, and then licked her fingers. You ever laugh so hard you can't breathe, but you're gagging at the same time? Then one time we had a dude having a solo moment on to a rack of FUBU, which speaks for itself. The best and funniest catch I ever made was this guy who grabbed $1,300 worth of high-end clothes on Christmas Eve and bolted. We got a call right as he was making his getaway, so we took off running after him. We get to the parking lot, and there's a 50-yard trail of clothes with 2 big guys standing over one guy who's screaming about his legs. My partner and I look at each other like, what the hell? We figured maybe these 2 customers chased him down and gave him a beating. We head back to check the outside cameras, and sure enough, the guy runs past those 2, a mound of clothes in hand. They start chasing after him. Then, out of nowhere, a getaway vehicle, a minivan with the sliding door wide open, comes barreling up next to him. The guy can barely see through the pile of clothes he's shedding, and he's scrambling to keep ahead of them. Suddenly, he stumbles, falls, and bam, the van runs him over. It was beautiful. Edit. Yeah, the guy survived. Story 10. I watched camera tape, found secret rubber dong. For a short stint in college, I worked at a small brewery as the assistant manager/bartender in the pub. Every now and then I would check out the security camera footage to see if hobos were trying to break in or what shenanigans the employees were getting into. Other than junkies shooting up in the alleyway or smoking everywhere, there wasn't much to speak of and nothing worth checking out. Until one day. It was a slow night, and I decided to take a peek at the camera log. I noticed something strange on the feed from the brewery from earlier that day. One of the brewers had something pink in his hand and went into the brewery bathroom. When he came out, the mysterious pink object was gone. Naturally, I went to see if the pink object was still there. When I got to the bathroom, there was nothing out of the ordinary in sight, and certainly no pink object. I played cop and dug deeper, and when I lifted the back cover of the toilet, my mouth dropped. I kid you not, there was a 9+ inch long and very thick rubber dong resting in the upper deck of the toilet. I immediately replaced the top and went back to my duty, probably sweating and staying awkwardly quite the rest of my shift. I'm pretty my subsequent interactions with that brewer were never the same. Story 11. I used to work overnight shifts doing security, and one night, I noticed a car park behind a building at a trucking site and switch off its lights. I zoomed in on the window and was greeted with a pair of bare cheeks pressed against the front window, with the guy rapidly moving his hips. A woman was giving him a blowy. For our own sanity, we sent a guard to check it out, and he kept us on speakerphone the entire time. As he approached the window, it seemed like the guy had just been done, and we heard our guard laughing hysterically. Right as he stepped up, the man accidentally kneed the woman in the face while trying to get back in his seat to drive off. It was honestly a hilarious moment. Once they were gone, the nearly retired guard chuckled and mentioned he'd be getting laid that night. We all just stared, not really knowing what to say to that. Story 12. I work as a surveillance agent at a casino, so I've witnessed a lot of bizarre things. Here are a few examples. One time, I saw a guy in the hotel who was so drunk he forgot his key after going out to get ice. But here's the kicker, he also forgot his pants. So there he is, standing in the hallway in just his undies, pissing on the floor. Eventually, he stumbles into the lobby, still in his undies, to get a new key. It was absolutely hilarious. Another time, I saw a guy on bath salts barking at cars and acting like a dog. It was so bizarre that we had to call the cops. I've also seen some interesting things on phones. Once, a girl pulled up her camera and I zoomed in to see if she was violating the no-picture policy on the gaming floor. Turns out, she wasn't taking pictures. She was sending pictures of herself unclothed. I got a full-body view, and well, it was definitely something to remember. And of course, there are plenty of tweakers who stay glued to the slot machines, gambling all through the night. It's honestly kind of sad. One of the more interesting scenes involved a couple having a greasy banging session on the chairs in the casino. They were pretty sneaky about it. Dude was having a blast playing the slots too. It looked like a great time. I also witnessed a bit of chaos when Ron White, the comedian, played Mr. Steal Your Girl on some guy's significant other. The boyfriend stormed up to Ron's room, grabbed his girl, and broke a beer bottle on the way out. You get to see fights, too, and replay them over and over. A lot of weird, greasy stuff goes down in a casino, and it's honestly pretty hilarious to watch it all unfold and then be able to rewatch it at will. Story 13. I work in apartment management and encountered a 60-year-old banned drunkard at one of the units with a younger attractive chick with her 2 kids and her boyfriend. I warned her 3 times that he was banned and that she'd get into trouble if he was there. Later, I received a complaint from a neighbor who disliked her, claiming she was screwing somebody in the common breezeway outside. I watched the security footage, and sure enough, she was getting banged outside at midnight in the breezeway by the 60-year-old homeless dude. She couldn't bring him back to her apartment because her boyfriend was watching the kids. I also realized she was struggling with alcoholism. Ultimately, I had to ask her to leave. Story 14. I worked at a government-run water treatment plant. Every hour the guard is supposed to make his rounds throughout the plant. There were specific points he had to observe, and then enter it into the log. Well, the log entries were all real generic. It definitely looked like he just wrote some crap down without actually looking. Well, they had already decided prior to put a security cam in the guard shack. It would point right at the window where the cars pull up to. This was only done because he was just letting employees in, even though he's supposed to check every car. So, a camera was installed without his knowledge. The first damn night the guard is standing in front of the window with his pants around his ankles. His flabby blinding white A was violently shaking left to right. He opens the window, then pours his smoothie right out of it. Closes the window, wipes himself off with one of those big Band-Aids from the first aid kit. The next night he was fired. However, the guard shack will always be known as the Whack Shack. Story 15. I saw 3 casino floor waitresses go to a storeroom behind a bar, then pulling their tops down and comparing their sizes and feeling each other for bounciness. Apparently one of them just got implants, and they were comparing them to the real thing. This went on for over 5 minutes, then they pulled their tops back up and went to work like it was nothing. Story 16. A woman I know went to a casino about 2 hours after they opened on a weekday to pick up tickets for a show. As she was walking past the security desk, she noticed 2 women behind it laughing hysterically. She recognized one of them and asked what was so funny. Turns out, just a few minutes earlier, they had found a pair of women's inners. Not that unusual, but given it was so early on a weekday and the inner was a big pair of granny panties, they got curious. So, they started replaying the security footage. Sure enough, they saw a little old lady in a dress with a walker strolling along the main walkway. As she walked, her undies started slipping down. With each step, they fell a little more until they hit the floor. She stepped right out of them and just kept going, totally unaware. Story 17. I worked at a halfway house where I was responsible for monitoring 22 different cameras. I worked the evening shift, and sometimes when my coworkers couldn't make it, I had to work a double. One night around 3 a.m., it was pretty quiet, which is unusual since most of the residents are asleep at that time. The ones who are awake are usually up to no good. I noticed an older man, probably around 65, leaving his room. As soon as I saw him, I called my coworker over to see what I was witnessing. This guy was only wearing an undershirt with the sides cut off, and that was it. Thankfully, it was long enough to cover him. He had long hair tied into pigtails, and to top it off, this former biker gang member and self-proclaimed manly man was walking around like a woman, pulling down his shirt like it was a dress. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. He went to the laundry room, opened the dryers, and started sniffing someone's inners. I saw another resident put it in there. Then, he proceeded to put the undies on. He did this whole process about 6 or 7 times, trying on different people's undies, before finally picking one, and then hopped like a rabbit back to his room. The next day, he acted like nothing had happened, but my co-worker and I couldn't help but keep calling him Hopper. Story 18. I used to work security at the big public library downtown. My shift started hours before the library actually opened, so I spent a lot of time alone just watching the security cameras. The library was one of the few heated public spaces downtown, and since it gets pretty cold in my city, homeless people often spend a lot of time there. One day, I saw 2 regulars, who were always drunk, head up to the top of a stairwell in one of the building's corners and start. Well, let's just say they were definitely getting busy. I'm pretty sure people hook up all over the place. If it's even slightly hidden, chances are someone has used that space for shagging at some point. I showed the construction guys who were working that day, and they got a good laugh out of it. I acted like I hadn't seen anything and made my supervisor deal with it because honestly, I didn't want to interrupt what was probably one of the few moments of joy in 2 very miserable lives. And let's face it, it was also pretty gross. Story 19. I used to work night security during the summers at a recreational campground. The place had a mix of tent sites, RV hookups, and cabins. Everything from basic to luxurious ones with their own hot tubs. It also had multiple pools, tennis courts, miniature golf, you name it. Basically, it was camping for people who didn't actually want to rough it. One night, a group of young women in their 20s, who turned out to be a bachelorette party, approached the back gate cameras in what looked like a military-style formation. They all turned at once and, without missing a beat, flashed their headlights at the cameras. The incident quickly became known around the campground as the 12-gun salute. Story 20. I used to work in the control room at a county jail about 10 years ago. It was our job to control all the automated doors and the security cameras in the facility. This included following officers with the cameras during wellness checks every 15 minutes through our special housing, which involved checking each individual cell's camera. One day, we were following the officer on the first check after lunch was handed out. We start checking every cell camera, a lot of unclothed guys eating sandwiches, but nothing unusual, until we get to about the 6th or 7th cell. The first thing I see when the feed comes up is blood. There's blood everywhere. The bed, the sink, the toilet, the floor, the walls. It's on everything. But the guy is amazingly still on his feet and screaming at the officer when we enabled the intercom. He's screaming, "I don't need it. I'll never need it again, so just take it," and throws something at the door. His dong. He threw his dong. He broke his lunch tray and used one of the pieces to cut his dong off. Because as he saw it, he was never going to need it again because he was going to be sentenced to prison. I don't even remember what his charges were, but I remember that he was only looking at about 2 years max. Story 21. I am not in physical security, but one place I worked at was a hidden bunker in the middle of nowhere. The car park looked like it was just a random paved area in the middle of fields hidden down a tiny country lane, as the entrances couldn't be seen easily. We had cameras watching the outside, and one weekend a bunch of expensive cars pulled up, people got out and started filming a corn movie, then just drove off. But the weirdest thing was that we noticed the cows in the field next door always had at least one cow watching the entrance. They took turns. One cow would always start watching the door before another would look away to start eating. We got a little obsessive about trying to find any footage where there wasn't a cow staring at the door and could never find any. Story 22. Not a security guard, but I'm an RA for a residence hall at my university. There was vandalism in my hall, and in order to find who did it, we, my staff, looked at the security footage of that hallway. The vandalism was a hole in the wall, about knee/hip height, so it was safe to assume someone kicked it in, and we had a general time frame of when it happened, so we were looking for someone to come up and kick the hole in the wall as we watched this footage. Well, we see 2 young men walk into frame, appearing to be in some sort of drunken stumble. They stop to hug each other and continue to kiss and make out. Then things escalate. I should note that this hallway is at the far end of the building, furthest from the main entrance, and it was approximately 4 a.m., so they had privacy on their side. Anyway, Dude 1 starts giving blowy to Dude 2. Then he turns around so that Dude 1 has his back against the wall. They were so into it that Dude 2 pounded Dude 1's head into the wall. A hole appears, then grows with each consecutive movement, and naturally, Dude 1 passes out below the hole. Dude 2 cleans up, covers himself, and wakes Dude 1. Then they both walk out of the frame and out of the building. Our staff was mesmerized, and no one said a word during the entire viewing of this footage. The two guys could not be identified, and we believe they probably were here visiting friends. Who knows? College is weird. Story 23. I used to be a security guard in Kuwait, and let's just say, the Kuwaiti National Guard didn't realize they were being supervised. One day, I noticed one of the guards had his feet propped up in the window of his guard booth, clearly not paying attention to his duties. So, I sent out a supervisor to wake him up and remind him that he was supposed to be on alert. When the supervisor arrived, things took a turn. It turns out that the guard's relief had shown up early, and instead of just taking over, they were, well, let's just say, in the middle of a rather intimate situation. The supervisor walked in right in the middle of it, but don't worry, the guards were quick to insist that they weren't gay. Just a little Middle Eastern surprise for the day. Story 24. I worked in a museum and had the head of security show me one of his guys, a supervisor, doing his best to hop over the admissions desk. The guy didn't get enough air and landed squarely on the glass of the admissions desk. It shattered around him. It was pretty fantastic. Even better, it wasn't a move that he was pulling for some sort of security-related obligation, but it was after hours, and he was trying to impress a new hire. Story 25. Every security department saves some of the best clips or clips that might be needed to use in future court dates or to protect them. The best clip I ever saw was a fight take place in a Walmart parking lot. Started with two women arguing, and that quickly escalated into a full-blown cat fight. But that wasn't the interesting part. Their two male friends started getting into it. One pulls a tire iron out of the back of his truck. The second quickly goes to his car and pulls out a golf club. They start acting like two gorillas, showing how tough they can be. The one with the tire iron starts swinging it around above his head when it slips out of his hand and hits a kid who was walking by with his parents. By coincidence, the cops show up at the exact same time. They were pretty brutal stopping that fight. Story 26. Around 9 p.m., this guy was working video monitoring when he noticed something moving out in a nearby cornfield. Curious, he panned the camera and zoomed in, expecting to see a deer or maybe just the wind rustling the stalks. Instead, he spotted a black, dog-like creature walking through the field. It moved strangely, but at first, nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. Then, just as he was about to return the camera to its original position, the thing suddenly stood up on its hind legs. Without hesitation, it sprinted across the field toward the tree line, moving way too fast for comfort. When he told me about it, I called BS immediately. But since the system saves all its footage for 30 days, I got to watch the recording myself during training with him. And let's just say, I wasn't so skeptical after that. Story 27. Most of the time, reviewing pub footage is just routine and uneventful. But every now and then, something truly disgusting stands out. Two moments, in particular, come to mind, more gross than weird. One night, a woman in a short dress scooted to the edge of the bench seat she was on, casually hanging half off the side. Without hesitation, she pulled her underwear aside and defecated on the floor, all while sipping her drink and chatting with her friends like nothing was happening. She remained there for about 20 minutes before moving on, completely unfazed. On another occasion, a woman was blowing a male patron's whistle in a dimly lit corner of the bar. In the middle of it, she suddenly stopped, vomited, wiped her mouth off, and then, without missing a beat, continued as if nothing had happened. Whenever we found vomit, feces, or blood in the bar area, we'd check the security footage, hoping to identify the culprit and prevent them from coming back in the future. Story 28. I'm a security guard, and one night, I saw what looked like a spherical UFO hovering above the cars in the parking lot. It moved smoothly, drifting around the trees, across the field, and toward the back of the building. A few minutes later, I spotted another similar sphere on the internal cameras, floating upstairs before disappearing from view. At that moment, I was completely freaked out. A week later, I decided to review the footage again with a clearer head, and that's when reality hit. The UFO in the parking lot? Just a balloon. The second floating object? A dust particle. Turns out, my paranoia was fueled by the alien documentary I had watched right before my shift. Story 29. I work as a bouncer at a bar, so I've seen my fair share of wild things when reviewing security footage from the night before. From drunken brawls to people sneaking off to do things they really shouldn't in public, nothing surprises me anymore. One of the craziest things I've seen was two guys double-stuffing a woman in the back bar. The door was locked, but that didn't stop them. One of the guys used a credit card to pop the lock and let themselves in. I've also watched countless drug deals go down, people flashing the cameras without a care, and more pairs of jugs than I could possibly count. But the weirdest, most unexpected thing? My ex-wife, giving a blowy to a guy while staring directly at the security camera, almost like she knew I'd see it. Turns out she did. My buddy tipped me off about it because he figured she was doing it just to get under my skin. If that was her plan, it backfired. I didn't get mad. Instead, I just made sure all the bartenders and waitresses got to see it too. Story 30. I'm not a security guard, but my father owns a self-service car wash and a small strip mall in a pretty rough part of Las Vegas. To keep an eye on things and prevent vandalism or theft, we had CCTV cameras installed. Given the area, we expected to catch some sketchy activity, but what we actually saw was on a whole different level. Nighttime was when things really got wild. The cameras picked up plenty of worker girls using the car wash bays as their personal motel rooms, and we'd often see homeless people digging face first through our trash, searching for anything useful. It was basically a free-for-all after dark. But hands down, the craziest thing I ever saw was a guy, high out of his mind, going to town on one of the car vacuum hoses. It was pretty surreal. And in the most ironic twist of all, after just 2 months of recording all this insanity, the cameras themselves were stolen. Story 31. I work at an art gallery, and one summer, we had an outdoor installation called Gumhead. It was a massive bust of the artist whose exhibit it belonged to, and visitors were encouraged to stick their used gum onto it. By the end of the exhibit, the thing was absolutely covered. Layers of chewed-up gum, baked under the summer sun, rained on, and even splattered with bird crap. It was as disgusting as you'd imagine. One night, while monitoring the security cameras, I noticed a guy pacing around the sculpture. Something about the way he lingered made me zoom in for a closer look. That's when I saw it. He was picking old, nasty, sun-melted gum off the bust and shoveling it straight into his mouth like it was candy. I've seen some weird things working security, but that one will haunt me forever. Story 32. A friend of mine used to work as a security guard at a facility with a one-way mirror. From the outside, it just looked like a regular full-length mirror on the wall, but on the other side, security could see everything happening in the room without anyone knowing they were there. One day, a job applicant arrived and, before heading in, stopped at the mirror to check herself. First, she inspected her teeth for any lipstick stains. Then, completely unaware of her hidden audience, she reached into her V-neck top and adjusted her headlights, making sure everything was sitting just right. The security guards on the other side nearly choked trying to hold in their laughter. She never ended up getting the job, so clearly, HR wasn't in on the entertainment. Story 33. I used to work security at a hospital, and while we didn't have cameras, some of the things I witnessed are burned into my brain forever. One night, I got called to a patient's room to deal with a difficult situation. When I arrived, I found a tiny, frail old woman, maybe 65 pounds soaking wet, who was absolutely losing her mind because she wanted her cigarettes. The nurse was trying to explain, as patiently as possible, that smoking in a hospital room wasn't an option, especially since she had oxygen tanks hooked up. You know, the whole flammable gas thing. Also, it's a hospital. Probably not great for anyone on the floor. That's when she decided everyone was conspiring against her. She started screaming that the nurses had stolen her smokes from her purse, which, to be fair, had been confiscated when she was admitted. But then things took a turn. She became convinced that the nurses thought she had cigarettes hidden somewhere on her person, and in response, she started shrieking, "Search me! Search me!" while ripping off her robe. So now I'm standing there, watching 65 pounds of pure, bare rage, praying this situation will de-escalate on its own. Spoiler, it did not. She suddenly decided she was done with this place and announced she was leaving, still fully bare. I was not in the mood for a geriatric streaker situation, so I simply blocked the doorway and gave her the best I don't get paid enough for this stare I could muster. I had better things to do, like play Angry Birds and maybe get a little shut-eye. Realizing her escape route was cut off, she glared at the nurse, pointed at me, and shouted, "He better stand there all night, 'cause I'm frigging leavin', bish." At this point, my patience was gone. I looked her dead in the eye and told her she needed to get her narrow back in bed and stop bothering the nurses, who were just trying to do their jobs. She stared at me, completely defeated. For a second, I almost felt bad. Then, without another word, she shuffled back to her bed, still bare, muttered a string of insults at us, and promptly passed out. And that was my first day on the job. Story 34. I didn't work security, but I was at a storage center that had about 20 cameras, and I definitely saw some things I'll never forget. There was this one lady who was just gross. She always smelled like garbage, and honestly actual crap. One hungover Sunday, I was checking the cameras when I noticed her casually strolling down the hallway. And I kid you not, crap was pouring out of her as she walked. Another time, I came in at 8 a.m. on a Sunday and found an old RV parked across all the spots in our lot. It looked like something straight out of Breaking Bad. The door was wide open, so I walked up to check it out. Inside, a complete mess, corn VHS tapes scattered everywhere, dirty underwear, and these creepy, worn-out baby dolls. Me and the cops went through the tapes, and we found this guy in his 40s pulling up to the RV at 4 a.m. He slammed on the brakes, hopped out of the RV in a full sprint, and ran straight into the woods, and he was wearing a suit. To this day, we still have no idea who he was. Story 35. I'm from Singapore, and I first heard about this story from some older guys who had done guard duty at our military airbase, where we monitor the fence line for any signs of intruders. The troopers actually saved the footage, which is how I was able to see it myself. The video showed a more secluded part of the fence line, making it difficult for the people in a car parked nearby to realize they were right next to the airbase. It was an elderly couple sitting in the car during the early hours of the morning. The woman took out a bao, a traditional Chinese steamed bun filled with food, and they shared it as part of their breakfast. But after they finished eating, things took a bizarre turn. The woman, who appeared to be in her 60s, began giving her husband a BJ. Yeah, that happened. Story 36. I worked at a mental health facility that had a section that was partially abandoned. Sometimes, patients would manage to get off on the vacant floors and wander around in total darkness. One night, I saw a woman who was a repeat offender of this. Her name was Tay. She had a disturbing habit of putting feces under her fingernails and scratching the guards when she was denied entry to certain areas for mental health services. I was watching the cameras when I saw her get off the elevator on the abandoned surgical wing. I kept an eye on her to make sure she wasn't planning to take off. But then, in the pitch-black darkness, she suddenly stopped, turned around, and pointed directly at the camera. The thing was practically invisible in the dark, so it seemed almost impossible that she could even see it. But she pointed, then put her finger over her mouth, making the universal shushing gesture. Then, without warning, she sprinted down the hall, disappearing from view. At that point, I had to go after her. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear her laughing maniacally and slamming doors in complete darkness. Oh yeah, I worked the third shift. After that night, I'd had enough and quit after 6 months. Story 37. I work as a hotel security guard on the weekends to make some extra money. One night, while watching the third-floor camera, I noticed a white figure that looked like a baby following a woman back to her room. When the woman entered her room, the figure disappeared. I didn't think much of it at first, but later I mentioned it to one of the other security guards. He told me that a few years ago, a 2-year-old had snuck into one of the housekeeping closets and climbed into the laundry chute. Tragically, the child fell from the 3rd floor all the way down to the basement and passed away. I'll be honest, the idea of being stuck in a rundown Best Western for eternity doesn't exactly sound like a pleasant afterlife to me. Story 38. I used to work the night shift as a security guard in a 34-floor hotel. During my rounds, I walked by the gym and noticed a huge hole in the wall, about 1 by 1.5 meters, covered up only by one of our potted ferns, which was clearly an attempt to hide the damage. After reviewing the security footage, I saw what happened. A man, easily over 300 pounds, was on the treadmill. It was obvious he had no clue how to use it, and he was struggling with the controls. As the treadmill sped up, he couldn't keep up, and the next thing I knew, he flew off the machine, slammed into the wall, and stayed down for at least 5 minutes. Eventually, he got up, casually dragged the fern in front of the hole, and just walked out like nothing happened. Story 39. A few years ago, I worked at a well-known discount retailer and was friendly with the store's loss prevention team. One day, they called me into their camera room to show me some footage from the weekend. The video footage showed several overhead shots of a middle-aged man lingering behind different young women. He'd look around, seemingly waiting for the perfect moment, then quickly bend down to sniff their behind. He was surprisingly slick about it. None of the women noticed him, even though his face was just a couple of inches from their behinds. The detectives caught him on camera doing this at least 4 or 5 times before they finally tracked him down and told him to leave the store. Story 40. I briefly worked security at my college dorm, and honestly, you wouldn't believe some of the things people do. My personal favorite was watching this tiny girl get into an elevator. As soon as the doors closed and she was alone, she just started spinning around and randomly punching the air. She didn't stop until she got to her floor. Then she just walked out like nothing weird happened. I also saw a guy once stop the elevator doors from closing with his head. His head was stuck there for a solid 20 seconds before the doors finally reopened. Story 41. I worked as a security officer at a bank where we had cameras inside and outside. The outdoor cameras were specifically there to capture license plates in case of a heist, though thankfully, that never happened during my time there. One day, something in the upper right corner of one of the outdoor camera feeds caught my eye. It looked like a small animal moving back and forth, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I sent one of the other officers to check it out, and he came back shaking his head with a huge grin on his face. Turns out, it was a homeless person handling his dong in broad daylight. Story 42. A family friend with a massive house hired me to house sit for them. They just needed me to feed their dogs, fish, cut the grass a couple of times, and basically make it look like someone was home. The first night, they asked me to stay over because the house across the street was throwing a big party, and they wanted me to keep an eye on the outside, patio, garage, and security cameras. I brought my laptop and was playing Gary's Mod while glancing at the cameras every so often. At one point, a bright light on the pool cam caught my attention, and I saw 2 sorority girls with sparklers making out on the deck. I was like, what the hell? I grabbed the big mag light they gave me, shouted at the girls to get off the property, and they giggled drunk as they left. I didn't see anything else after that. Edit. To the people who keep saying I should have slept with the sorority girls. No. Here's why. 1. They were drunk and couldn't properly consent. 2. Everything was on camera, and it was a busy street, so the chances of a neighbor telling the homeowner were high. 3. Just because I was an angsty, horny guy doesn't mean I have no standards. 4. The girls were sketchy, and STDs could have been an issue. 5. Pregnancy would have been a real risk. If I got caught, they'd have been arrested for statutory SA since I was underage. 6. If I got caught, I'd lose face with my parents and the homeowner, and I definitely wouldn't be able to talk to his attractive daughter. So please F off. Story 43. During my 6 years working security at a high-end hotel, I came across all sorts of bizarre incidents. It's tough to pick just one, as there was always something weird going on. Blowies in elevators and quickies in back hallways were pretty common. There was even a wedding where the groomsmen were given swords as wedding favors. That led to a hilarious moment when one of them got so drunk, he started going on a racist, dong-size insulting rant in the lobby. Of course, this turned into a brawl under the porte-cochere on a busy Saturday night. But the most random thing I witnessed? 2 women in their early 20s who rode an elevator for what felt like forever, stopping at various floors. They started grabbing random bits of furniture from the elevator foyers and room service carts. By the time they were done, they had set up a full table and chairs inside the elevator, complete with a vase of flowers and a plate of hors d'oeuvres. And then they just left. Story 44. During my 3 years working security across various settings, primarily office buildings, I've come across people doing the deed in some pretty unexpected places. From lobbies and bushes to elevators, freight elevators, and even their own offices, it wasn't uncommon. I was trained to handle these situations by approaching the individuals and first asking if everything was okay, as we were never to assume the act was consensual. Usually, the question would prompt them to quickly grab their things and leave. One of the strangest encounters was finding 2 people in Halloween costumes going at it in a parking garage. Both were extremely intoxicated. The woman ran off, leaving the guy behind, who struggled to stand before passing out. I had to roll him onto his side to prevent him from choking if he started vomiting. When the police arrived, he was bare from the waist down, drooling, groaning, and still in his clown costume. Story 45. I used to work at a hotel, and one day, a group of college students came up to the front desk, practically buzzing with excitement. They asked if we had any security footage from the pool area between 3 to 5 a.m. Naturally, we were curious, so we pulled it up. Apparently, they had rigged the pool door lock earlier that night, so they could sneak in later. We didn't mind much since they were checking out the next day, so it was no big deal. We pulled up the footage, and sure enough, around 3 a.m., they slipped into the pool area. About 30 minutes later, the real fun started. They began a drunken belly flop competition. It was both hilarious and impressive. One guy in particular took the lead and did 5 flawless belly flops in a row. And I mean, these weren't just any belly flops. They were perfect, grade A, no fear, full-on splashes. The kind of belly flops that make you wince just thinking about them. After the last belly flop, we told him he'd won. He threw his arms in the air, celebrating like he'd just conquered the world. But then, with a sudden change in expression, he dashed outside, probably to throw up. It was honestly one of the most bizarre, yet impressive things I've ever seen. I've never seen a belly flop competition like it, and definitely never seen 5 back-to-back that were that good. We told him that he won, and he raised his hands up in celebration, got a funny look on his face, and ran outside to puke. I have yet to see a more perfect belly flop, yet alone 5 of them. Story 46. I worked at a school that had a cemetery on the grounds. One night, I caught a couple in the middle of it, and it turned out to be a hilarious, first-time experience dealing with something like that. Hi there. I worked for a private security service for less than a year back, in 2011. I had the chance to work on some cool contracts, including being posted at a college football bowl. Sometimes, I'd get assigned to a graveyard shift at a school where they train people to become nuns/priests. Forgive me, I can't remember the exact name for this kind of institution. It was a large campus, but nothing too exciting, just driving around in a golf cart all night. This particular school had an on-site graveyard and a prayer center outside, with a large wall where people would light candles for the Virgin Mary and Jesus. Though I wasn't very religious, I found the prayer center to be really peaceful. Strangely, there were never any crickets or night noises in that area. Ever. I'd also hear the sisters tell a few spooky ghost stories, one of which involved a ghost that allegedly cried loudly at the graveyard from time to time. The school had no strict curfew, so it wasn't uncommon to see people wandering around at 3 a.m. One young couple would show up on a sports bike now and then, spending about an hour and a half at the prayer center, just making out. It was, well, quite the spectacle, but I didn't mind since they were always alone. After seeing them for several days in a row, one night they didn't show up. It was foggy, drizzly, and cold. I was grabbing a soda from the vending machine across from the prayer center when I started hearing long, drawn-out moaning sounds from down the road. I hopped on my golf cart, turned on my yellow lights, and drove around, but didn't see anything or hear anything else. After about 10 minutes, I decided to sit still and see if it happened again. Sure enough, the moaning returned, but this time, it was much louder and unmistakably the same woman from before shouting, "Oh yes." I was 19 at the time and totally unprepared for this kind of situation. I had no idea what to do, but knew I had to act fast. I didn't know where the campus security cameras were, or if there were any. And since we were only basic foot guards, there was no fancy surveillance setup. So, I did what seemed like the best option. I called my girlfriend, who had been texting me that she couldn't sleep. I turned on my lights, drove to the graveyard, where I knew they'd see me, and started talking really loudly to her, pretending I didn't notice what was going on. The graveyard was pitch dark, and the area was about the size of a football field with entrances at each end. My conversation with my girlfriend was totally casual, even talking about some personal stuff with my mom. Around that time, I distinctly heard a crap, "Where'd my pants go?" from the guy LOL. Eventually, they split out the other entrance, hopped on the bike, and drove off. I felt like I'd handled it well. The next morning, I checked out of the site at 7 a.m., exhausted, and went home to sleep. Later that afternoon, my boss called me around 3:30 p.m., asking, "Did anything happen last night at the school?" They called and said they found a pair of pants and some women's inners in the cemetery. I replied, "No, everything was quiet last night." I've got everything written down on my time sheets, acting as oblivious as possible. That's pretty much where the story ends. The boss ended up adding another security spot to the contract, so I wasn't the only one on site after that. Story 47. I once saw a guy knock an automatic sliding door completely off its track because he was too busy looking at his phone. Had to call a tech to fix it. Then there was this other guy who tried to steal a spinner of sunglasses, but misjudged which automatic door opened and slammed into it, sending glasses flying everywhere. He managed to get away with the fixture and maybe 4 pairs of glasses. I watched a woman pull out a pair of bolt cutters from her purse to snip the security wire on some handbags. She cut 2 wires and ran off with 4 bags. She got caught later that afternoon. There was this poor old lady who stopped in front of the escalator briefly, and when she moved, there was a brown spot on the floor. She'd started to have an accident and tracked it up the escalator and halfway across the store to the bathroom. After she was done and came out, she just kept shopping like nothing had happened. Our store was basically a biohazard for the rest of the day. Story 48. Not a security guard, but I frequently review videos for situations that happen at my work. I'm one of the most adept people in my building when it comes to using our camera system. We had a situation that happened outside of our building that needed reviewing, but nobody was sure of the exact time. Cue to me watching a 12-hour block of footage, with as much as 16x fast forward, to get some details. I had my boss's boss in the office with me while he was working on something else, as I stared at the computer monitor, trying not to fall asleep. After half an hour or so, I finally spot the person I'm looking for and get excited, so I lean forward right into the screen, scouring for previously unnoticed details. Right at that moment, a spider ran onto the camera lens. Keep in mind, the recording I was looking at was days before when I was watching it, and the camera was outside on the opposite side of the building from me. That didn't stop me from screaming so loud I could probably have been heard outside, causing the boss's boss to jump on his chair as if there was a cartoon mouse in the office. When I tried to explain it and rewind the video, I couldn't find the spider again, and he just thought I was insane. He always looks at me funny when he comes by to visit our building. He interacts with thousands of people in my same position all across the country, yet he remembers me for screeching about a spider that was never anywhere near me. Story 49. I worked at a fully contact haunted house last Halloween, and it was hilarious hearing the security guards talk about the things they saw on the monitors. One time, the owner mentioned he was walking by the security room when he saw an actor pick up a guy, throw him over his shoulder, and toss him into the coffin, which, to be honest, was actually pretty comfy. He was a bit horrified, but the security guard just shrugged and said, "Yeah, he's been doing that all night." It was at House of Shadows in Gresham, Oregon, and honestly, it was a blast. As for insurance, I don't know all the details, but there are disclaimers everywhere, on the tickets, on signs, basically making it clear what you're getting into before you even step in. Of course, the warnings only go so far, but there's always the option to tap out if things get too intense. Plus, there were a lot of mandatory training sessions for the actors to learn how to safely handle themselves and the customers to prevent any injuries. I really love that kind of experience, but I know it's not for everyone. One of my moms wanted to come check it out, but I told her, "You would absolutely hate it." Story 50. I work in retail security, and let me tell you, I've seen some crap. But the single weirdest thing that stands out was probably this one incident with a full-on bear guy on PCP who was being chased by the police. The whole situation was wild. This guy was completely out of his mind and ended up breaking through the thick window glass on the driver's side of a Mercedes just to evade capture. The cops tried to stop him, but what really got me was that the officer said the guy didn't even flinch when they hit him with the taser. Just a completely bizarre scene to witness. On a less dramatic note, I do a lot of theft research at my store. One time, I was reviewing some footage about these gel bra stuffer things we'd been having issues with, and I noticed something strange. Every single woman who walked past that section would check their bust size, like clockwork. I couldn't help but laugh a little at how consistent it was. It was just so weird to catch it on tape. And here's one that isn't live but still memorable. I was watching some footage from another store, and I saw a security guy in his office. Well, let's just say he wasn't doing his job the way he should have been. He was, engaged in some personal activity. I was honestly shocked, but I guess people do some pretty strange things when they think no one's watching. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.